Now, to bring a story like Harry Potter from the page to the screen, the starting point is your original novel, written by you, of course, J.K. Rowling. And the script is based on that novel, but is written by the screenwriter, of course, you, Steve Clovis. Can you explain both how you work together to produce the final script? Because it must be very, very different writing a book as compared to writing a film.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I just steal her best stuff.
That's
you know,
basically
and take
it. And I
credit
don't
for it.
sue.
No, I think the thing, what's always been great about Jo is that she's, from the beginning, she gave me tremendous elbow room. But when you're in the middle of a series like this, it's important that I talk to Jo along the way and ask her, beyond advice, just simple advice on certain sequences and things, but just, am I on the right path? And Jo's always been good about, you know, she's maddening in the sense she will not tell me what's going to happen, but she will tell me if I'm going down the wrong path.
I've given you more than I've given anyone else, which I probably shouldn't say on screen, or they'll kidnap and torture him. We need him. But yeah, I've told Steve probably more than I've told anyone else, because he needs to know. So, because it's incredibly annoying of me when he says, well, shall we cut that, or I wanted to do this, and I said, well, yeah, well, no, because, you know, in book 6, something will happen and you'll need that in, or you know, that will contradict something that happens, and I can feel him on the end of the emails, and I'm like, do you mind telling me why? So I have told him things. But he's very good at guessing. He's guessed more shrewdly than anyone else, I think.
How frustrating is it for you working slightly in the dark with some of these issues, Steve?
Well, it's frustrating because, you know, you like to know where, when you're writing a character, you like to know where they're going.
I'd tell you if you were dying.
That's nice to know.
Yeah. But you don't need to know at the moment.
I am dying. Hopefully, it's gonna take a while. I think, yeah, it's only, you know, it's frustrating just that, you know, again, it comes down to the details and the magic of those details. And I think just reading the books is such a wonderful experience.
There are so many rich details in the books. Can you tell us how you decide what goes in and what stays out?
I will sometimes ask Jo. I mean, I will say, you know, this detail, you just seem to have cast just a bit more light on this in this scene than the other details. Sometimes I'm wrong, but often she'll say, no, that is going to play. I won't. There's one thing in Chamber, actually, that, you know, Jo indicated will play later in the series. I mean, the hardest thing for me, honestly, is I'm writing a story to which I do not know the end, which is, I'm not going to lie to you, it's been the case sometimes in my own originals, but I assume I will find an end. With this, it's just I'm writing a story over a decade, in a, you know, sense, and I keep waiting, you know, keep hoping that Jo will slip up and actually tell me something, you know.
In this movie, we've seen the kids develop from the first film. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about the relationship between Harry, Ron and Hermione, and how that is developing film by film?
Well, I think it is developing in the film as it does in the books, which is to say that they're much stronger together than apart, and they're much more aware in the second film of their particular strengths. So they're more effective. The children are able to do more complex things. For example, the Polyjuice potion. And also, Chris in the second film has kind of foreshadowed what I don't do until the 4th book, which is that you get hints of certain feelings between the 3 of them that belong to a sort of slightly more mature person.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you're seeing in Chamber that magic's becoming a bit second nature to them, at least simple magic is, and that basically it's, you know, a little bit of knowledge will get you into a lot of trouble, and I think that's what we're seeing in the second one, is that they're getting more mature, but they're still, you know, it's a dangerous kind of knowledge.
How do you feel about what the kids were like in this movie?
You know, the first thing you notice when you watch the movie is that, you know, Harry and Ron's voices have dropped about 2 octaves, which is just bizarre. And suddenly they're not these cute little moppet heads running around. It's like, you know, children will grow, you know.
Steve, Hermione is a character who you've said in the past is one of your favourites. Does that make her easier to write?
Yeah, I mean, I like writing all 3, but I've always loved writing Hermione because she's a tremendous character for a lot of reasons for a writer, which also she can carry exposition in a wonderful way because you just assume she read it in a book. If I need to tell the audience something...
Absolutely right. I find that all the time in the books. If you need to tell your readers something, just put it in her. There are only 2 characters you can put it convincingly into their dialogue, and one is Hermione, the other is Dumbledore.
Yeah,
because in both cases, you accept it's plausible that they have. Well, Dumbledore knows pretty much everything anyway, but that Hermione has read it somewhere, so she's handy.
Yeah, she's really handy, and she's also just, I think, tremendously entertaining. There's something about her, you know, her fierce intellect coupled with a complete lack of understanding of how she affects people sometimes that I just find charming and irresistible to write.
Does Dumbledore speak for you?
Oh yes, very much so. Yeah, Dumbledore often speaks for me.
I mean, how do you see Dumbledore, Steve?
I think Dumbledore's a fascinating character because I think he obviously sort of imparts great wisdom that comes from experience, but I've always felt that Dumbledore bears such a tremendous dark burden, and he knows secrets, and I think in many ways he bears the weight of the future of the wizard world, which is being challenged, and the only way to sort of that he can keep that at bay, the darkness, is to be sort of whimsical and humorous, and I think that's just it's just a really interesting thing. I think he's a character of so many layers, and I think when he does say something, that it is our choices and not our abilities. I just think coming from him is somehow, it doesn't feel like a sermon, it doesn't feel like a message, it just feels like, you know, an absolute truth, and it goes down easy, you know, and I like that about him. But that's what I like about the books. I've always said that I thought that Joe's writing is deceptively, you know, profound, which is that you never feel there are messages in there, and but there's a lot of things being dealt with in a very sort of clever way, and they're never pretentious, the books, and I think it's why kids love reading them.
I mean, you say that you don't set out to put particular messages in each book, they grow organically, but do you think it's important to have the right messages there when they do emerge?
Well, obviously, in the wizard world passes for racism, that's deeply entrenched in the whole plot. You know, there's this issue going on about the bad side really advocating a kind of genocide to exterminate what they see as these half-blood people. So that was obviously very conscious, but the other messages do grow organically. But I've never set out to teach anyone anything. It's been more of an expression of my views and feelings than sitting down and deciding what is today's message. And I do think that, although I never again sat down consciously and thought about this, I do think, judging even from my own daughter, that children respond much better to that than to thought for the day.
What was the most important difference in doing the story for Chamber of Secrets as opposed to the first film?
We probably had more contact on the first film, but then we probably needed more contact on the first film because we were establishing a relationship that has now lasted 2 years and is going to last hopefully longer. So, you know, that was really about getting to know how what we needed from each other. So it's probably a good sign that we had less contact on Chamber because I think there's a lot of trust there. I mean, I was very prickly when I met Steve, because I knew they'd chosen this American guy. Even though he wrote and directed one of my favourite films, was Fabulous Baker Boys, I still thought, well, you know, he's American. Not to be, I don't know, I was most worried about meeting Steve. He was the writer, he was going to be ripping apart my baby. And turns out I really like him, so that worked.
How do you communicate? How does all that work, and how often?
Varies to what we're doing at the time.
Owls.
Owls mainly, obviously, a bit of flu powder.
How does this film differ from the first?
I think it is, I think we would both say, an easier book to transfer into a film, isn't it? The first one is episodic. You have individual adventures. It chops and changes more. And I remember when we were working on the script of Philosopher's Stone, that was something that came up continually, wasn't it? That you have these sort of discrete adventures. And Chamber is a more linear structure, so it was easier to translate to screen, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, though I thought it was going to be easier than
it actually turned out to be.
Because you do have that sort of Tom Riddle moment where Tom explains it all, and that's always challenging in a movie.
Yeah.
And also, what's interesting about, I think, what makes Chamber interesting is that things are occurring that you don't really quite understand until Tom explains them at the end. So you've got to work toward that moment and hope you can hold the audience during that moment. But there's no question it had more of a sort of, it just had more of a tight plot to sort of play out.
And what were the biggest challenges for you in this film?
I mean, the challenge always for me is, keeping it from being 4 hours, because I like everything, that... What I honestly think is magical about what Joe does is the details. And so my first drafts are always chock full of details. I mean, I think the thing for me is the things I respond to sometimes, are hard to sort of put in proportion. I mean, I was really interested in the whole mudblood thread. So that became a very interesting emotional thing for me to write in the script. I don't know that it's still there in the way that I saw it entirely. But that was, those, you want to give them some of those things weight in some way, so that becomes the challenge in many ways. But it's mainly compression.
And Joe, were there any bits of Chamber of Secrets that didn't reflect the way that you originally saw it in your mind?
It's interesting what Steve says about the mudblood theme, because I would agree, but that's always pressure of time and space with the film. That is a stronger theme in the book, and yet it is present in the film. But for me, I suppose, when I look back on that book, or I think about that book, that is the time in the overall series where the issue of pure blood becomes very important. So, yeah, maybe more weight to that.
What stands out most in this film?
It was scary. I've always thought Chamber of Secrets, people underestimate how scary that book is. And in fact, it's the book I've got the most complaints about, bizarrely. Possibly because people got upset at Chamber of Secrets and didn't carry on reading the rest of the book. So, and I think that's certainly translated to the screen. A couple of really frightening moments.
The visual effects are a huge part of bringing the magic to life. In this film, we have Dobby, we have the Pixies, we have Fawkes, we have the Basilisk. What do you make of the effects in this movie?
Dobby's wonderful. Dobby's really, really good. And the mandrakes, superb. I really love the mandrakes.
Is that a big challenge for you, Steve, getting the effects, or getting those scenes right?
No, it's easy for me, because I just write it and dream it, and then someone else has to actually do it. No, but I'm amazed when you see something like the mandrakes, which is really, it's essentially puppetry. Which
part of Chamber of Secrets were you most excited to see on screen?
I was most worried about the spiders. Because you see these old sci-fi movies where you have giant spiders, and they're always hysterically funny. They're never scary. And it's easy to write a scene like that in a novel and make it scary. But when I started thinking about how we were going to actually see that, in fact, it is extremely frightening. They're the most frightening large spiders I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I had the same concern. I just thought, as I was writing, I was saying, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
You've got, got Aragog saying, who goes there, basically? This giant spider, and you're saying, this is just going to be hysterical. I'm sorry, I'm laughing as I'm writing it. Imagining it being... Yeah, but the one thing you learn about movies is that the thing you're the most worried about often is the thing that's not a problem. And the thing you don't worry about is a complete disaster. So I've found that all... I mean, it's funny, you talk about the scares in the movie. I mean, I know the thing that terrified my son the most in the first movie was opening the book and the book screaming. And I think it was because it was something he could identify with, which is he could take a book off the shelf and open it, and there might be a face in there screaming. He wasn't scared by the other things at all.
But I think I read those are the sort of details I write because that would scare me. Yeah. I read all the time, and just to open something and have it shriek at me. And one thing that I thought was well done in the film, Chamber of Secrets, was the diary. Now, the diary to me is a very scary object, a really, really frightening object. This manipulative little book, the temptation, particularly for a young girl, to pour out her heart to a diary, which was never something I was prone to, but my sister was. And the power of something that answers you back. And at the time when I wrote that, I'd never been in an internet chat room. But I've since thought, well, it's very similar, just typing your deepest thoughts into the ether and getting answers back, and you don't know who is answering you. And so that was always a very scary image to me in the book, and I thought it worked well in the film. You could understand when he started writing, to see these things coming back to him. The power of that secret friend in your pocket.
Yeah, I always loved that in the book. I thought that was just one of the great, that someone's writing back to you that you do not know who they are, and there is something inherently ominous in that, but the fact that they also know, they know the secret you want to know. And they're inviting you, there's like a finger beckoning you, but into the past. I always thought that was incredibly interesting concept.
How different has it been working on the script for now the next movie, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban?
Well, we've just started. I mean, I honestly think it's gone as well as any of the others, and I think it's. I mean, personally, I feel it's going to be the best movie.
Yeah,
I think we're at a better place than we've ever been on the script, and we're months from starting shooting. So I think it's the best place we've been. I think 3 could really be interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Where does 3 stand in your list of favourites, book-wise?
Oh, it is. I know it's very corny and all right to say it, but it is like choosing between your children. It really is. But I have a very soft spot for 3 because of a couple of the characters who crop up there for the first time. Lupin and Black, obviously, very important characters, and yeah, I'm really fond of them.
I mean, so far you've had 2 very successful collaborations on Harry Potter. What are your hopes for the future of the Harry Potter series?
Well, I hope Steve keeps writing the scripts, because I'm used to him now, you know. Just keep being faithful to the books, I suppose. From my point of view, I'm bound to say that, aren't I?
Oh, J.K. Rowling and Steve Clovis, author and scriptwriter. I'm sure we're looking forward very much to the results of your future collaborations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.